The day my son laughed at me, I stopped thinking of him as my child, not because he refused to help me, because of what he said while he was laughing. I'd rather spend money on Bruno's gourmet dog food than waste another dollar on you. The room exploded with laughter. His wife laughed. Her brother laughed. Even their neighbors sitting around the backyard barbecue laughed like I'd just told the funniest joke of the year. I looked down at the paper in my hands. It wasn't a demand for money. It was an eviction warning. The apartment building I'd lived in for 14 years had just been sold. My rent was increasing by almost $900 a month. After paying for my heart medication, I simply couldn't afford it anymore. I wasn't asking my son to rescue me forever. I only needed 3 months, 90 days, just enough time to sell something I'd spent 37 years building. But none of them knew that, because none of them had ever bothered to ask. My name is Leonard Hayes. I'm 69 years old. For 37 years, I owned one of the smallest commercial greenhouse businesses in the county. Most people never knew my name. But if you bought flowers from local grocery stores, garden centers, or city parks, there was a good chance they had grown in one of my greenhouses. I wasn't rich. I wasn't famous. I was simply a man who believed that if you worked honestly long enough, life would eventually become peaceful. I was wrong. 5 years earlier, my wife, Carol, died after a sudden stroke. Losing her broke something inside me. I sold our family home because it was simply too quiet. Every room reminded me she wasn't coming back. The greenhouse business stayed open, but I stepped back from daily operations and leased it to a young management team. The lease payments covered my retirement, or at least they had, until last winter, an unexpected ice storm destroyed 2 production houses. Insurance refused to cover most of the structural damage because of a technical exclusion buried deep inside the policy. The repairs drained nearly everything I'd saved. I wasn't bankrupt, far from it, but almost every dollar I still owned was tied up inside the business itself. The land, the equipment, the contracts. Selling everything overnight would have been financial suicide. That's why I only needed a little time. My son, Derek, knew most of that. Or at least, he used to. When he was 28, his restaurant failed. I quietly paid off $138,000 of business debt. When his second child was born early, I covered the hospital bills. When he couldn't qualify for his first mortgage, I guaranteed the loan. I never kept score. That's what fathers do. Or at least, that's what I believed. Over the years, Derek changed. His wife, Melissa, loved expensive things. Luxury vacations, John Star handbags, important furniture. Their social media pages looked like they belonged to celebrities. But behind every smiling family photo, there was another credit card, another loan, another payment plan. They spent money the way some people collect souvenirs, always believing another paycheck would fix everything. The only member of that household who seemed genuinely happy was Bruno, a giant golden retriever. The dog had orthopedic beds in 3 different rooms, monthly spa appointments, pinpoint organic food, a birthday party every year. Sometimes I joked that Bruno lived better than most people. I never imagined one day my own son would compare me to the dog. The barbecue had been Melissa's idea. Family Saturday. She invited neighbors, co-workers, and relatives. Everything looked perfect. Music played softly. Children ran through sprinklers. People admired Derek's brand new outdoor kitchen. I waited until everyone had finished eating before mentioning my situation. I didn't want anyone to feel uncomfortable. "Derek, could we talk for a minute?" He nodded, right there in front of everyone. "What is it?" I handed him the rent notice. "I've run into a temporary problem. I need a little help for a few months." He scanned the paper for less than 10 seconds. Then he laughed. Not a nervous laugh, not an awkward laugh, a real laugh, the kind that makes your shoulders shake. Melissa looked over. "What happened?" He held up the notice. "My dad wants money," she smirked. I thought retirement meant people planned ahead. More laughter. Then Derek looked directly at me. "You know what? I'd rather pay for Bruno's premium food than waste another dollar on you." Someone actually spit out their drink laughing. I stood perfectly still. No anger, no shouting, just silence. Bruno slowly walked over and sat beside me. The old dog rested his head against my leg, almost as if he understood something the humans didn't. I scratched behind his ears. Then I folded the rent notice, slipped it back into my pocket. I understand. Derek shrugged. I figured you would. No, you don't. He frowned. What does that mean? I smiled for the first time all afternoon. It means this will be the last favor I ever ask you. Melissa rolled her eyes. Finally. I nodded once. Yes, finally. I walked to my old pickup truck. As I drove away, I wasn't thinking about the rent. I wasn't thinking about the laughter. I was thinking about a document locked inside the safe at my greenhouse office. A document Derek had completely forgotten existed. Years earlier, when I leased the business, instead of selling it, I had included one condition. One simple condition: if I ever chose to terminate the lease, everything inside the business, including every active supply contract, returned to me immediately. And Derek's newest company, the landscaping business that supplied plants to nearly every luxury housing project in the county, depended on those contracts more than he realized. He had laughed because he believed I needed his money. He had no idea. His entire business was still standing on ground that belonged to me. I didn't spend the night worrying about the rent. I spent it reading contracts. For 37 years, I had been the kind of businessman who read every page before signing Derek. Not so much. The next morning, I unlocked my greenhouse office for the first time in months. The smell of fresh soil and blooming lilies instantly reminded me why I'd never truly retired. This place had never been just a business. It had been my life's work. Margaret Ellis, my attorney, arrived 15 minutes later carrying 3 thick binders. She had represented my company for nearly 20 years. She looked at me and smiled. I take it your son finally crossed the line. I nodded. He laughed. She didn't ask any more questions. She simply opened the lease agreement. You remembered clause 22? I wrote it. She smiled. I know. The lease had been signed 5 years earlier when I stepped away from daily operations. Most people thought I had leased only the greenhouses. I hadn't. I had leased the production rights, the customer relationships, the distribution system. Everything. Under one condition. If the owner determined the business was being used in any way that threatened its long-term stability, the lease could be terminated with 30 days' notice. Margaret looked across the table. Do you believe that's happening? I slid another folder toward her. Inside were financial reports I'd quietly collected over the previous year. The management company Derek partnered with wasn't maintaining the facilities. Broken irrigation systems had been patched instead of repaired. Cheap fertilizer had replaced premium products. 2 experienced growers had resigned because management refused to replace failing equipment. Worst of all, several long-term customers had complained that flower quality had noticeably declined. Margaret slowly closed the folder. This is more than enough. It isn't personal. It doesn't have to be. It's business. For the first time since the barbecue, I smiled. Exactly. It wasn't revenge. It was responsibility. That afternoon we drove to the main greenhouse. Derek wasn't expecting me. When he saw Margaret carrying legal folders, his confident smile disappeared. Dad, what are you doing here? I came to inspect my business, he laughed. Our business, I calmly corrected him. No, my business. Melissa stepped out of the office. Oh, this again. You really can't let yesterday go? I ignored her completely. Instead, I walked through every greenhouse with an independent agricultural inspector. He photographed leaking irrigation pipes, diseased rose bushes, broken climate control units, damaged heating systems, entire sections of neglected orchids worth thousands of dollars. The inspector kept shaking his head. This should never have happened. Derek followed us, growing more irritated. It's cosmetic. It doesn't affect production. The inspector looked directly at him. It absolutely affects production. And if these fungal infections spread, you could lose 40% of your inventory before winter. Derek, went silent for nearly 3 hours. The inspection continued. Employees avoided eye contact. Several quietly thanked me for coming back. One older grower finally pulled me aside. Mr. Hayes, we've been trying to reach you for months. What do you mean? They told us you didn't care anymore. They said you wanted to cash out and retire. I frowned. I never said that. He nodded sadly. We figured. They stopped forwarding your mail. For several seconds, I couldn't speak. Letters, comma complaints. equipment reports, comma concerns. They had never reached me. Everything had been filtered through Derek's office, not because they were protecting me, because they were protecting themselves. Back inside the conference room, Margaret placed a single document on the table. "What is this?" Derek asked. "Official notice?" "Notice of what?" "Termination of the operating lease." Melissa actually laughed. "You can't be serious." Margaret slid another document across the table. "The agreement allows 30 days beginning today." Derek's face turned pale. "You can't shut this down." "I'm not shutting it down. I'm taking it back. You don't understand." "No, I finally do." He stood so quickly his chair tipped over. "My landscaping company supplies every luxury subdivision in the county. I know. We have contracts booked 6 months ahead. I know. We'll lose millions." I looked at him calmly. "You should have thought about that before deciding your father was worth less than your dog." For the first time since the barbecue, nobody laughed. The room was completely silent. Then the greenhouse manager quietly walked over to me. He extended his hand. "Welcome back, Mr. Hayes." One by one, the senior employees did the same, standing there, watching the people who actually built the business choose my side. I realized something: the greatest asset I'd ever owned wasn't the greenhouses, it wasn't the land, it wasn't even the contracts. It was the respect I'd spent decades earning. And Derek had just discovered. Respect isn't something a father automatically leaves to his son. It's something a son has to deserve. The next morning, my phone rang before sunrise. It wasn't Derek, it was the president of Evergreen Estates, the largest housing developer in the region. His first words told me everything had already begun to unravel. "Mr. Hayes, I've just been informed your company may no longer be supplying our landscaping projects. I'd like to discuss doing business with you, directly." By the end of that week, Derek wasn't calling to apologize anymore. He was calling to negotiate. I ignored every call. If he wanted to talk business, he could do it through my attorney. Margaret's office became unusually busy. Representatives from 3 major developers requested meetings. 2 national garden center chains wanted to renew contracts that had nearly expired. A city parks department asked whether I planned to continue supplying seasonal flowers. For the first time in years, people weren't asking for Derek. They were asking for Leonard Hayes, the man who had built the reputation in the first place. One afternoon, Margaret walked into the conference room carrying another folder. "You should see this." "What is it?" "Derek's financial statements." I frowned. "How did you get those?" He attached them to a loan application. She placed the papers in front of me. My stomach tightened. His landscaping company wasn't just struggling, it was drowning. 3 new trucks, 2 luxury SUVs, a warehouse purchased with borrowed money, equipment financed at high interest. Nearly every payment depended on one thing: the greenhouse contracts. Without them, his entire business would run out of cash within weeks. Margaret looked at me carefully. "I need to ask, go ahead. Did you know he was this exposed?" I slowly shook my head. "No, I knew he depended on the contracts. I didn't know he'd gambled everything." She sighed. "He's been living like next year was guaranteed." I quietly looked out the office window. Carol used to say something whenever business was good: never mistake today's success for tomorrow's security. Derek had forgotten that lesson. Or maybe he had never learned it. 3 days later, he arrived at the greenhouse, not with Melissa, not with his lawyer, alone. He looked exhausted. Dark circles surrounded his eyes. His expensive watch was gone. Even his truck had been replaced with an older pickup. He stood outside my office door for almost a minute before knocking. "Come in." He stepped inside. "Dad, I just want 5 minutes." I nodded toward the chair. He sat down. For several seconds, neither of us spoke. Finally, he whispered, "I've lost 2 contracts. I know Evergreen cancelled yesterday. So did Stonebridge Communities." I remained silent. He rubbed his face. "The banks are freezing my credit." I still said nothing. Then he looked directly at me. "I didn't think you'd actually do it. I know. I thought you'd cool off." "This isn't about cooling off. It's about consequences." He lowered his head. "I made a mistake." I looked at him. "No, you made hundreds. The barbecue was only the first one you finally noticed." His shoulders slumped. "I know." "No. You know you got caught. Those aren't the same thing." He swallowed hard, then something unexpected happened. He started crying, not dramatically, quietly, the way a man cries when he realizes there's nobody left to blame. "I don't know how I became this person," I answered honestly. "It didn't happen in one day. It happened every time you chose comfort over character." Before he could respond, there was another knock on the office door. Margaret stepped inside. "I'm sorry to interrupt, but you should probably see this." She handed me a printed email. It came from one of Derek's largest commercial clients. They wanted to transfer their entire landscaping account directly to my company. Annual value, just over $2.8 million. Derek saw the number, his face went white. "If you accept that, my company is finished." I folded the paper. "I know." He looked at me desperately. "Dad, please. For the first time in my life, I'm asking you for help." The irony hung in the room. Only a month earlier, I had asked him for temporary help with rent. He laughed. Now, his entire future depended on the answer of the father he had humiliated. Margaret quietly left the room, closing the door behind her. Only Derek and I remained. He spoke again. "I'll sell everything. I'll apologize publicly. I'll do whatever you ask." I leaned back in my chair. "You still don't understand." "What don't I understand?" "You think this is about money." "It never was. It was about dignity. You treated me like I had become a burden the moment I stopped being useful." He couldn't look at me. Then I asked him one simple question. "When you compared me to Bruno, did you mean it?" He covered his face with both hands. I wish I could take those words back. I know, but words don't disappear. They become memories. After several minutes, he stood up. "I've already lost Melissa." I looked up. "What do you mean?" "She left yesterday. She said if the business fails, there's no future together." He laughed bitterly. "I guess she loved the lifestyle more than she loved me." I didn't celebrate. There was nothing satisfying about watching your own child finally understand pain. As he reached the door, I spoke one last time. "Derek." He turned around. "You once told everyone you'd rather spend money on your dog than waste another dollar on me." He slowly nodded. "I remember. I held up the developer's contract worth $2.8 million. I don't need your dollars anymore." I placed the unsigned agreement back on the desk. "But whether I sign this, or whether I give you one final chance to prove you've changed, that's a decision I'll make tomorrow." For the first time since that humiliating afternoon at the barbecue, Derek walked away not knowing what would happen next. And sometimes, uncertainty is a far harsher punishment than immediate loss. I didn't make Derek wait until tomorrow. I made him wait 3 weeks, not because I enjoyed watching him suffer, because real change isn't measured in hours, it's measured in choices. During those 3 weeks, I heard plenty of rumors. His newest truck had been repossessed. He sold his fishing boat. The luxury SUV Melissa insisted they buy disappeared from the driveway. Even the country club membership was cancelled. For years, Derek had built a life that looked successful. Now he was discovering the difference between looking wealthy and actually having something worth keeping. I spent those same 3 weeks rebuilding my own business. Old employees returned. Former customers came back. The atmosphere inside the greenhouse completely changed. People smiled again. Flowers that had been neglected were blooming. Broken equipment was replaced. For the first time in years, the business felt alive. One Friday afternoon, Margaret walked into my office. "The numbers are finished." She handed me a report. Revenue had already increased 28% since taking back operations. Customer complaints had dropped to almost zero. Every major developer had renewed their contracts. Then she smiled. "There's something else." "What?" "The bank approved your expansion loan." I laughed. "At my age?" "They said your business has one of the strongest reputations they've seen." Funny, a month earlier, my own son thought I was a financial burden. Now banks were competing to lend me money. Life has a remarkable sense of humor. The following Monday, there was another knock on my office door. This time, it wasn't Derek, it was Bruno. The old golden retriever trotted inside, tail wagging, with a leash dragging behind him. A second later, Derek stepped through the doorway. He looked embarrassed. "I'm sorry, he pulled me in here." I knelt down and scratched Bruno behind the ears. The old dog happily leaned against my leg. I smiled. "At least one member of your family was always happy to see me." Derek lowered his eyes. I know. He didn't ask for money. He didn't mention contracts. Instead, he placed a folded check on my desk. I looked at the amount, $200. What's this? The rent money. I frowned. My rent was never your debt. I know, it's the amount you asked me for. I sold my motorcycle. You don't owe me this. He shook his head. Maybe not, but I owe my father. For several seconds, neither of us spoke. Then I quietly pushed the check back across the desk. I'm not taking it. His face fell. You should know, you need it more than I do. I don't understand. I asked you for help because I believed family stood together. I don't want repayment. I wanted respect. Tears filled his eyes again. I finally understand. I believed him, not because he cried, because he had stopped talking about himself. He started asking questions. How's your heart? Are you taking your medication? Have you been eating properly? Simple questions. The kind a son should have been asking long before money ever entered the conversation. A week later, I invited him to dinner. Just him, no Melissa, no neighbors, no audience, no barbecue. I grilled steaks. He helped prepare the vegetables. After we finished eating, he automatically stood up and began washing the dishes. I smiled. You missed a spot. He laughed. I know, I've got a lot of catching up to do. That evening, I finally made my decision. The next morning, I signed the $2.8 million developer agreement. Not with Derek's company, with mine, but before the paperwork was finalized. I added one condition. Derek would receive a job, not as an executive, not as a partner, not because he was my son. He would start as a project supervisor. He would earn every promotion, exactly like everyone else. When Margaret read the contract, she looked surprised. You trust him again? I answered carefully. I trust him enough to give him an opportunity. Trust itself, he'll have to earn. 6 months later, Derek had become one of the hardest working supervisors in the company. The employees respected him, not because of his last name, because he showed up early, stayed late, admitted mistakes, and treated every worker with dignity. One afternoon, we were loading flowers for a charity event when a little boy walked up holding his mother's hand. He pointed at Bruno, who was lying beside the office door. That's a beautiful dog. I smiled. He sure is. The boy looked at Derek. Does he belong to you? Before Derek could answer, he smiled at me. No, he belongs to my dad. Then he put his arm around my shoulder and said something I'll never forget, and I'm lucky enough to belong to him too. I never did cash that $3,200 check. Instead, I framed it and hung it inside my office, not as a reminder of the money, but as a reminder of the day my son finally understood something priceless. Money can replace a missed rent payment. A new business can replace a failed one. Even a broken reputation can be rebuilt with enough honesty and hard work. But the moment you laugh at the parent who once carried you, you risk losing something that no amount of money can ever buy. Fortunately for Derek, he learned that lesson before it was too late. And every Friday afternoon after work was finished, we drove home together, Bruno sitting happily between us. The dog my son once claimed was worth more than his father ended up bringing his father and son back together.